The editorial on 26th August 1908 in a weekly newspaper published from the princely state of Travancore read like this. It is of course very long since in the whole of India there began a sort of persecution of the press by certain sections of the bureaucracy, the only papers which have suffered up to this being those which have been thought by the authorities to be connected with treason, by way of suppressing what has been believed by the Sarkar servants to be a bad tendency on the part of journalists, a tendency both to pass wholesale condemnations of the government as a body and to attribute pessimistic motives to the government en masse. The officers of the Sarkar have been seen to resort to means perhaps far from desirable. This is a little bit natural, but even when far more fierce volcanoes might be bursting in the political circles of India, the southernmost corner of it, going by the name of Travancore and separating itself from India at least in the respect of popular feelings, has to be described by no other expression than all the air a solemn stillness holds. Yeah, 116 years ago. This is how the editorial started. This is only one of the polite editorials that was published in the paper. The editorial is special. It documents that particular moment in time when a newspaper chose to mark the silence of the press when actually their voices were the most needed. The editor of the newspaper was Ramakrishna Pillai. The proprietor and key force behind Ramakrishna Pillai's words were Vakkom Abdul Khader Moulavi. So, what happens when a visionary scholar meets a journalist with a spine? Okay, so if you have grown up in Kerala or studied in schools in Kerala, or if you know about the Reformation leaders of Kerala, then there is a high chance that you might have come across this name, Vakkom Abdul Khader Moulavi. You might have seen this photo in your textbooks, maybe you haven't. Vakkom Abdul Khader Moulavi is known as the father of Islamic Renaissance in Kerala, and you might have seen his picture among the photos of other noted social reformers of Kerala like Sri Narayana Guru, Mahatma Iyengali, Sahodar Nayappan, etc. He is the one who started Swadeshabhimani. But Vakkom Abdul Khader Moulavi's photo, which has appeared in school textbooks, pamphlets and newspaper articles whenever people wanted to show his photo, has been wrong. Sabin Iqbal, Vakkom Moulavi's grandson, said in an article that when Sabin Iqbal and his sister were kids, they would look at these textbooks about Vakkom Moulavi and they would be like sad, thinking that this is not their grandfather. In an article written in Open the magazine, Sabin Iqbal writes that my sister and I used to say, looking at the smudged, poorly reproduced photograph in our social studies text, that he is not our grandfather. Our father, his youngest son, used to smile a wry, helpless smile, as he had no memory of his father, who passed away when he was just a toddler. It then became the need of the family to replace the photograph of the unknown Moulavi with the real photograph of Vakkom Moulavi. After a lot of research, Sabin Iqbal managed to find out a really old, smudged photograph of Vakkom Moulavi. Now let's move on. So, Vakkom Abdul Khader Moulavi was born into a prominent Muslim Poondran family in 1873 in Vakkom, Chirangir Taluk in Travancore. His family's roots can be traced to Madurai and Hyderabad. He was well versed in many languages including Arabic, Hindustani, Persian, Tamil, Sanskrit and English. He even had personal tutors coming from distant places, including an itinerant Arab savant. Growing up, he believed in the critical role of media in social reformation and in achieving and protecting civil rights and liberty. He questioned the divinity of the royal and was determined to stand up for the rights of the people as citizens and not as mere subjects of a king. Now about Ramakrishna Pillai. He was born on May 25th, 1878 at Neyattingara, Travancore. He came from a prominent Nair family, and after dropping out of Bachelor of Arts degree at Maharaja College, where he had taken elective coursework in philosophy, which would kind of reflect in his writings later, Pillai started to work as a full-time journalist. On September 14, 1899, at the age of 21, Ramakrishna Pillai became the editor and managing proprietor of a journal called Kerala Darpanam. From the beginning of his journalistic career, Ramakrishna Pillai proved that he is not someone who would mince words to kiss ass. In his first editorial itself, he stated that those who observe carefully the ways of Malayalam press will realize that the editors have no clear idea of the duties and responsibilities of an editor. So why did Swadeshabhimani write that article? I'm talking about the article on 1908. Why did he feel that the press in Travancore was silent? Does that mean that it was alone in its criticism of the government? For that we might have to start from the beginning. To Travancore. The princely state of Travancore was situated between the Arabian Sea and the Western Ghats of India. It was at one point one of the most powerful kingdoms of South India, until the British supremacy came. The royal family of Travancore managed to keep itself afloat by major negotiations with the ruling British. In the early 19th century, the kingdom became a princely state of the British Empire. The kingdom covered most of the south of modern-day Kerala, including Idukki, Kottayam, Alappuzha, Pathanamthitta, Kollam and Trivandrum districts, and then major portions of Ernakulam district and Kanyakumari district, and some parts of Tenkasi district. Tangasheri area of Kollam city and Anjudanga near Attingal in Trivandrum were controlled by British India. But who were the people living there? Travancore was one of the officially Hindu states of British occupied India. The Kshatriya kings of Travancore ruled the place, calling themselves as Padmanabhadasas, or the servant of Padmanabha. This is a practice started by Martandavarma in the 1700s. In Travancore, the caste system was so rigorously enforced that the hierarchical caste order was deeply entrenched in the social system and was supported by the government. This social system was transformed so much into this religious institution that when the acclaimed reformer and Hindu monk Swami Vivekananda reached Thiruvananthapuram in 1892, his journey was shocking. At one point, the monk, even after waiting for 3 days, was not allowed to visit the famous Kodungalur temple in Thrissur. Why? Mainly because his caste was not clear enough to the temple authorities. Right. Referring to this dehumanizing caste system, Swami Vivekananda said that Kerala is a lunatic asylum, a mad house of casteism. The administration of Travancore was conducted mainly by the Diwan and the bureaucrats. The British had a control over the state and its policies, but the Maharaja of Travancore was supposed to be this supreme leader or ruler. And for centuries, the Nair caste had strong influence in the bureaucracy and army. The Diwans, the heads of the state bureaucracy, along with court officials and government bureaucrats, held enormous power and authority. They rarely considered the legitimate aspirations and rights of the subjects of the state, who had to get help from court officials even to secure their rightful privileges. No constitutional provisions were available for people to challenge their decisions or to demand what was their due. The state bureaucracy practically stood between the Maharaja and his subjects and prevented the cries of the people from reaching the ears of the Raja. The Maharaja received information about his subjects through the court officials, and these later greatly influenced his decisions. They generally indulged in a continuous policy of nepotism and favoritism and filled the state bureaucracy with their own kith and kin. By indulging in corruption, bribery, and nepotism, court officials amassed huge wealth and made the lives of common people in Travancore miserable. The Maharaja and the Diwans not only failed to root out corruption and nepotism, but also closed their eyes to it. Until the late 1800s, census records show mostly details of respectable classes, that is, people whose presence or touch was not offensively polluting. These mainly included Brahmins of all kinds, Nayars, Syrian Christians, Muslims, and a variety of numerous Hindu castes like Ambalavasis, Tamil Villars, Chettis, and Konkanis. Whereas later records would show that the so-called polluting castes or the Avarna castes were about 57% of the population. The near presence of such men or women were offensive to caste Hindus, Syrians, and even Muslims. This is the situation which brought the two visionaries together for something great. So you want to start a newspaper, but it's 100 years back and you're in a village in Travancore. What do you do if you want to know what is happening? Get news from other towns. And when you start a paper on your own, how do you circulate it? 100 years back, you start the newspaper where the local post office is or where the Anjal office is. In August 1904, a 31-year-old Abdul Khader from Vakkom opened his own publishing house with a modern printing press 2 miles away from his village, at the nearest local post office in Anjadanga, or Anjango as the British call it. Moulavi imported an automatic flatbed printing press through Piers Leslie from England at a cost of Rs 12,000, that is in 1905. In comparison, an acre of land in Travancore could have been bought for Rs 100. Moulavi was clear that the paper will not hesitate to expose injustices to the people in any form. He named both the printing press and the newspaper Swadeshabhimani, or the Patriot, as the leitmotif of his activities was patriotism, not business interests. Chirangid C.P. Govindapilla, the editor of a newspaper Kerala Vibhanchika, was appointed as the first editor of Svadeshabhimani. Vakkom Moulavi was the managing editor. In 1905, Khader launched Swadeshabhimani, or the Patriot, as a weekly newspaper. Fear, crookedness and greed will not build a country. The proprietor printed the line under the masthead of Swadeshabhimani. In the first edition of Swadeshabhimani, on January 19, 1905, its editor C.P. Govindapilla wrote, "We don't declare that Swadeshabhimani will perform great things for the Muslim community and other communities who desire their well-being. Our primary objective is that Swadeshabhimani's work should promote public welfare and prosperity. To achieve this objective, we will do our utmost. We will not conceal any public grievances, fearing dangers that may happen to us." So when the printing press was launched, Malayalam newspapers such as Malayalam Manorama carried an announcement about the launching of Swadeshabhimani, introducing it as the only Muslim newspaper of Travancore and Cochin. When C.P. Govindapilla decided to quit the editorship of Swadeshabhimani to focus on his other journals, his decision temporarily interrupted the operations of the press and newspaper. During this time, Vakkom Moulavi was seeking ways to improve the work of Swadeshabhimani. In 1906, he erected a new building adjacent to his house in Vakkom and relocated the press there. The dual task of running Swadeshabhimani and leading the Muslim reformist movement at the same time soon proved unmanageable for Moulavi, and he started looking for a new editor for Swadeshabhimani. By 1904, Ramakrishna Pillai was openly criticizing the government bureaucracy, and his clarity on state and people became stronger. When his articles in the paper Malayali found popularity among the masses and the provocation increased, the newspaper proprietor was pressured to tame the editor. But Ramakrishna Pillai maintained that the editor should be given total freedom to express his views. In less than a year's time, he had to resign from Malayali. Pillai decided to start a journal of his own rather than sacrifice his journalistic freedom by working under someone. In 1905, he started Kerala, which was his pen name in a previous paper. Pillai's criticism of the ultra-divinity claimed by kings and bureaucrats rose to another level. He explained clearly and at length that kingship is not a hereditary right, but one bestowed by the people. The authority of a ruler is derived not from God, but from the consent of the people. Ultimate sovereignty rests with people. That is more than 100 years back, when being in the sight of some particular people would land some other particular people in hot oil. Writing about the distinction between a subject and a citizen, that people have rights and duties as citizens of state, that was kind of badass. In 1905, when Moulavi offered the position of editor, Ramakrishna Pillai straight out refused. Pillai's previous experiences must have cautioned him. Vakkom Moulavi then went to meet him in person and offered him total authority over the management of the print and assured him unrestricted freedom to express his views. Pillai agreed. On 1st July 1907, Swadeshabhimani announced that the proprietorship of the paper will be held jointly by M. Abdul Khader and Ramakrishna Pillai. The paper also announced the decision to hand over the management of the paper and editorship to Ramakrishna Pillai. Soon after, the Swadeshabhimani press was relocated to Trivandrum from Vakkom, so that Ramakrishna Pillai might pursue his studies in law while managing the paper. In this way, Vakkom Moulavi and Ramakrishna Pillai became jointly responsible for all the affairs of Swadeshabhimani. The work of the paper became in fact more vigorous and effective after the relocation of the press to Trivandrum. The new location was convenient for sending and receiving news items, especially about the activities of government officials. In the first year, the paper was published on a weekly basis, but Ramakrishna Pillai gradually increased the facilities at the press and started to publish it twice and then thrice in a week. When the state legislative assembly was in session, he even managed to publish it daily. Swadeshabhimani questioned the corruption and nepotism of state bureaucrats and tried to educate people of their ruthless henchmen. Through articles, news reports, editorials and short notes, Swadeshabhimani brought their true nature to light. Ramakrishna Pillai used Svadeshabhimani as an instrument of radical criticism of the imperial rule in the state of Travancore. Court rulings that mentioned corruption charges against bureaucrats were translated and published in Svadeshabhimani. Even though these articles were written directly against court officials, Ramakrishna Pillai was indirectly challenging the existing political and social structure of Travancore and the Maharaja's failure to establish justice and equality. When the criticism became sharper and its popularity rose, it caught the Travancore government's eye. Ramakrishna Pillai's writings agitated the powerful Diwan and his bureaucrats. Sir V.P. Madhavarao was a Diwan of Travancore when Swadeshabhimani was founded. S. Gopalachari succeeded him and acted as a Diwan of Travancore. Things changed slightly with S. Gopalachari's successor, P. Rajagopalachari. He was heartily welcomed as a new Diwan of Travancore, and the editorials and columns of Svadeshabhimani also drew attention to issues that needed his urgent consideration. The tussle between Swadeshabhimani and Rajagopalachari begins now. In 1908, a major riot broke out in Chale Bazaar, Trivandrum. The merchants at the bazaar were often harassed by the police, and so they submitted a petition to the government to remedy their distress. Getting no reply, they closed the shops in protest and went in procession to the palace. Faced by police, the protesters stoned them and set fire to the police station. The demonstrators were finally suppressed with military help. On June 6, 1909, Ramakrishna Pillai criticized the Diwan. He wrote, "Nowhere in the history of the police oppression have there been committed greater excesses than here in Travancore. The incident connected with the recent riot case are a standing testimony to this truth. They are not less painful than those that are said to have taken place in other parts of India during these troublesome times." In response to this editorial, the Diwan dismissed Ramakrishna Pillai from Srimulam Popular Assembly. It is in this context that Pillai's editorial gains importance. You see, when people's rights and privileges were violated by state bureaucrats, no one had dared to raise voice against it in Travancore. Moreover, no journals in the state were ready to write about it and bring it to the attention of the Maharaja. But Swadeshabhimani, through its editorials and columns, highlighted the plight of the people, even by risking everything and always living up to its ideals. Considering the political and social structures of Travancore at the beginning of the 20th century, the newspaper was becoming the medium to express public grievances to the government in Travancore. Now let's get back to the editorial published on 26th August 1908. The editorial severely mocks the press in Travancore and says, "Further, not even one single word of the least repulsive kind of annotation, either on the sovereign personally or on his government as a corporation, has ever appeared in any of the newspaper about Travancore, not even in the course of strongly impeaching the highly impeachable acts, both of public servants as well as the favorites of His Highness the Maharaja, a fact which certainly means not only that the sovereign personally and his government as a working organization are all right, but also that the people have been brought up and trained in the knowledge and belief that it is unofficial to think of any crusade against their further, even if the dad might not be all right." He also mocked Western Star, a newspaper, an unoffending organ leaving out all offending matter and trying to get at the hands of others, especially the bigwigs, the certificate respectable. I'm not sure if Pillai is referring to the Cochin-based newspaper Western Star, which had shifted base to Trivandrum, or whether it's kind of a euphemism for crony journalists. Well, both fits. On one occasion, Pillai severely criticized Diwan's behavior. So apparently the Diwan had participated in the Silver Jubilee celebration of Srimulam Tirunal Maharaja, sitting reportedly drunk among a group of women on the balcony of the girls' school inside the palace fort. Swadeshabhimani reported it with the headline Garhyamaya Nadada, or censurable conduct. He concluded his report by arguing that if Vaishagam Tirunal were the Maharaja, the Diwan would have been publicly flogged with a whip by the Maharaja's horsemen. When Ramakrishna Pillai's criticism became sharper and sharper, the Diwan and his officials began to devise plans to control Swadeshabhimani. Ramakrishna Pillai's editorials on Diwan's alleged immorality, published on the 24th and 29th August 1910, provoked the Diwan and led him to swear revenge on Ramakrishna Pillai. On 26 September 1910, the press and the paper were sealed, confiscated by the Indian Imperial Police, and the editor Ramakrishna Pillai was arrested and banished from Travancore to Tirunelveli. The Travancore government, which suppressed Swadeshabhimani, also destroyed its remaining copies. Because of that, copies of Swadeshabhimani cannot be found in libraries in Kerala, at least not most of them. Swadeshabhimani practiced such a brand of journalism that no one had then dared to do in India, let alone in Travancore. The paper was also the first journal in Kerala to subscribe to the Reuters news agency. Influential nationalist newspapers like Leader from Allahabad and Bombay Chronicle from Bombay were published only after Swadeshabhimani was suppressed. Those who would talk about Swadeshabhimani Ramakrishna Pillai seldom mention the moving spirit behind it and the symbiotic relationship that prevailed between Vakkom Moulavi and Ramakrishna Pillai. Moulavi never found any need to interfere in the editorial policy when Ramakrishna Pillai was editor. When the king of Travancore, on the recommendations of the Diwan, suppressed Swadeshabhimani, confiscated the press and sent the editor into exile, Vakkom Moulavi refused to apologize for what he stood for and reportedly said that he did not want the press without the editor. Though it incurred huge financial loss to him, the setback did not deter his journalistic activities. The man who had bought a printing press from England for 12,000 rupees, when he died, he was in debt. Scholar Robin Jeffrey has argued that there were at least 3 stages in the expansion of print culture in India. The first one would be rare stage, that is from the 1820s until the establishment of newspapers in the 1860s and 70s, and the second one elite stage, and the third one the mass stage. Jeffrey has further argued that at the elite stage, print appears to have borne striking potency to change lives and mold new sorts of societies and governments. At this stage, print generated public action or public politics. It propelled social and political change and fostered political organization and mobilization. By this account, Swadeshabhimani falls into the elite stage of the expansion of print culture. Like many chapters of history, our textbooks bear the imprint of powerful rulers and administrators of the past. And it's like this shadow, like be it the British or the Indian state which succeeded it, while the British deployed the divide and rule policy and started a long history of alienating communities which were collectively against occupation and who protested. The Indian state and bureaucracy which succeeded it were mostly Savarna. The biggest bureaucrats were from the dominant caste, and the oppressed caste which didn't have lands on their own were sidelands. Our perceptions of history is gravely affected by the colonizers' discourse, the same discourses which has been used over and over by power holders in the country to suit their purposes. We don't have the exact editorials that Pillai wrote on 24th and 29th August 1910, which had instigated the Diwan. The editorial I found interesting was the one from 1908 August 26th. It kind of stands up to the bureaucracy and remains as a stand which Swadeshabhimani took. The ending of the 1908 editorial is also a message for the current population and journalists. Let it be distinctly understood that there are, in Travancore, at least among the riot and peasant population, people numerically stronger and morally better than the followers of the unoffending Western Star. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the podcast series by Barrack.